Welcome back to Financial Clarity for Doctors, everyone. This is Rachelle Vanderzanden here with Corey Janoff.
Hello.
Hello. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how that goalpost keeps moving for what will make us happy and excited about life. And really, it's just about increasing our standard of living over time, which is, it's happened a lot over the decades. Wants become needs, luxuries become necessities. Things that literally didn't exist 30 years ago are things that we must have, which may be the case, may not be the case. On one hand, this kind of drives progress. Like it drives economic progress. It makes it so that our GDP keeps growing and all of those kinds of things. And on the other hand, it keeps you running on the hamster wheel. Like you just have to keep going and earning more in order to keep buying all of the things that we feel are necessary. If you can kind of increase your income and your net worth faster than your expectations of your lifestyle are increasing, you'll feel like you're making progress towards financial independence, which is great. But if your expectations grow faster than your net worth or your income, then you'll have a hard time getting there. And maybe then it's time to reassess what you really do want and need and take a careful look at that. I think we're going to spend a little time today talking about like what was it like in the good old days, as our parents would say, and then some of the economic thoughts and factors that go into this, and then also just like kind of how to treat this moving forward, like we do with every episode.
I
But
find
I do,
myself
yeah,
starting to like reference those good old
the
days
good
with
old
my
days.
kids. Like, hey, when I was a kid, this is what life was like. You guys have
Oh
it
my gosh.
so easy now. We had to watch commercials. Like,
Yeah, I think that's so relevant when we're talking about technology specifically with our kids. So Corey and I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I'm a little older than Corey. He put 90s in here and I was like, "Hey, I'm an 80s girl, by the way." But, I was like 7 when the 90s started to happen. But there's a lot of nostalgia for that decade, those decades now. Like you watch Stranger Things and it's like, "Oh my God, this is amazing," partially because of the nostalgia. And there's lots of things that we think back on and we're like, oh, this was so much better back then. Like kids could go play outside without supervision. Like, okay, they can kind of still do that now, but we slap devices on them and, depends on their age and all that kind of stuff. We weren't glued to screens all day. So that's the huge thing that I end up talking to my little one about, at least. Like, God, like, it's so hard to argue with sometimes because she looks at her iPad, but she's on the library app. And I'm like, ugh, you're reading, but you're on your device. It's just so hard to navigate some of these things. But there was a lot of boredom, which I think is good for kids. Like boredom makes you use your imagination, right? Staring out the bedroom window, waiting for your neighborhood friends to get home. You couldn't like text them and be like, "Hey, when are you getting home, friend?" You could make your friends or your parents do that. The internet was in its infancy. You had to go to the library to actually look stuff up. There was not like Google. It wasn't a thing that I could do back in the day. You had to stop and ask for directions if you weren't sure where you were going. You had to carry a map in your car if you wanted to get somewhere and you'd never been there before, or have very detailed instructions that were written on paper about where to turn. Like, not even, I remember back in the day when we used to have to do like Yahoo Maps or whatever it was, and you could like print
MapQuest.
out yeah, MapQuest, and you could like print out step-by-step directions, and that felt like, amazing and life-changing. And now it's just, Siri in your car or whatever it is telling you step by step, you're going to have to turn in 50 feet. I mean, everything is so, so different. And I think some of this plays into that expectation of like, what do we need? Like, okay, back in the day, we needed a $20 map book. And now we need a 600, wait, $800,000 iPhone. I don't even know how much an iPhone costs anymore. I have no idea. But, you need this little computer walking around with you all the time to even function as a human being. So that's just one example of the many ways that life has changed and gotten more expensive over time.
Yeah, like if you don't have Apple CarPlay today, you're living like a relic in the past.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and I mean, the 90s is kind of our generation's nostalgia period to look back at. Like our parents' generation, they grew up in the 50s, which is often viewed as the golden age of economic prosperity in America, the post-World War II economic boom. Everyone came back from the war. We had the GI Bill. People were working. People started having kids. It was kind of the first introduction of suburbs, these cities and towns outside of the city, because before the war, you either lived in a cramped apartment in the city or you like lived and worked on a farm. There wasn't this suburban area where you were close enough to the city that you could commute in and then go home. Or so you know, I think the first most well-known suburbs were called Levitt towns, you know, pioneered by this building company, Levitt and Sons, and they built these cookie cutter homes, you know, in these neighborhoods. Some of you probably live in cookie cutter neighborhoods today where there's like 3 or 4 floor plans and they make the outsides look a little different and the insides have different fixtures, but it's all the same house. Um,
Hmm.
but this was kind of the first iteration of that. And you know, families, they could afford them on one income. The husband typically worked. The wife stayed at home and was the homemaker, tended to the kids. They had 4 kids, 1 car. Vacations were road trips to the beach or the lake or you know the shore if you're in New Jersey. Everyone piled into a station wagon and threw the luggage on top and strapped it down with ropes or bungee cords. You know, sunscreen was maybe you had it, maybe you didn't. It was in its commercial infancy. Tylenol wasn't available till the 60s over the counter. Advil wasn't available over the counter till the 80s. So good luck if you got a headache. You know, these,
Drink some water.
yeah, drink some water, sleep it off. You know, Levitt towns, they had these, like I said, simple floor plans. They were 750 to 800 square feet, no garage, no porch, no covered patio, no basement, no air conditioning, 1 bathroom shared by the entire family. But this was a massive upgrade from living in a cramped apartment in Manhattan or whatever city you were in, you know, or living and working on a farm sun up to sundown pre-World War II. You know, those, like I said, those are pretty much what you were used to, you know, before the war. And then after it was, hey, we can actually have a house to ourselves, space. We aren't sharing a wall with our neighbors. This is amazing. And coming home from the war, this was awesome. This was like more than they could have imagined. People flocked to these neighborhoods, but today those living conditions would be considered poverty. Like if you had to live in a 750 square foot home with 1 bathroom for the whole family, like honestly, like that would probably be poverty level by today's living standards. You know, and back in the 50s, it worked though. You know, people spent about 20% of their income on food back then. Today, we spend less than 10% of our income on food. So, you know, that goalpost has moved. Our expectation of what is reasonable, what is desirable is a lot different than what it was 75 years ago.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. You can compare like our standard of living now to standard of living decades and decades ago. But you can even compare like our standard of living now as a working adult to our standard of living as like a starving college student or whatever it was. Like even our own personal histories, you can look back and say like, what was this like? So I remember I did like a year in AmeriCorps NCCC, which is like a federal kind of volunteer um core thing. Like, I don't know. It was very cool and very fun. And I got to leave home and go live in like Washington, D.C. for a while. And they put a roof over your head. And then they give you like a living allowance for food and like whatever else you may need. But I literally got like $181 every 2 weeks. And that was what I had to do everything. Like if I wanted to go out to lunch, if I wanted to buy some groceries, if I needed like a new sweatshirt, like whatever it was, that was all that I had. So I literally, other than living costs, other than having a roof over my head, I was living on $400 a month. Like what the heck? How did that happen? And obviously, like inflation changes things as well, but still, that is not very much money at all, not even a tiny bit. And then from there, I went to college and I had a roommate and like tried to possible. I worked. I like lived on so little because I didn't want a bunch of student loans until I started working. And it felt like, like I cared about how much money I was spending and how much was like leaving my bank account. And I didn't have like a giant credit card bill because I was very, very careful. And now it's like, how does the credit card bill add up so fast? When you don't even think about how much you spend on a meal or at the grocery store or on summer camp because your daughter only likes the most expensive one, or, that one night at the school auction. Yikes, it adds up really fast, mostly because I don't care anymore. And like that's the problem. And I think that that's how your standard of living increases personally is when you stop caring about how much your money you're spending. And that is a good problem to have because it likely means that you have enough, right? Like you don't need to worry about it very much. But I do think like this all comes back to we work more to pay for our lifestyles, and our lifestyles really the thing that's making us happy. Like it doesn't even matter that we have all of these extra things.
Yeah, you were
Yeah.
probably just as happy, if not more happy, back in the $181 every 2 weekdays,
I
if we're
mean, I was
measuring it.
21
There's
and that was a
different
very,
fulfillment,
very
but
lovely time in my
yeah.
life, but obviously very different.
Yeah. Ditto. But yeah, I like college, shared a bedroom with roommates. We all know how that goes. And
Hmm.
then after college, my first apartment was with a roommate, 2 beds, 1 bath, utilities included for $350 a month each. It was great. Very, very reasonably priced. We cooked a lot of rice. Top ramen and spaghetti were also frequent staples. The $5 footlongs at Subway. Remember those good old days? And happy
Hmm.
hours where if we went out, it was
I
only happy
happy
hours.
hour was my life, right? Like that's the only thing you
Yeah.
do.
The early one and the late night one. It's like, all right, we can go from like 3 to 5 or after 9. That's when we're getting food.
Yep.
Dollar beer and wing night, Taco Tuesdays. Remember, I mean, this is an Oregon deal, but McMinimans, they used to do their burger and Cajun tots for $5 during happy hour, which was,
Did you ever do like McCormick and Schmick's or Jake's? They had like a
Mhm.
$1.95
Yeah,
like burger and fries on
I
their happy
do.
hour menu.
Yeah.
And it was like the huge steak fries and a big burger. And it was just
Yeah.
because they wanted you to drink,
Yeah.
and their drinks were not cheap.
No, but yeah, I definitely sat at the bar at McCormick's numerous times with
I worked
that
there in
burger deal.
college.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
many of you guys live the same way in med school and residency.
Residency.
Um, and life was great. And then, from there, we, Lindsay and I, or I, this is before Lindsay, but bought my first home. It was actually a condo in 2010. And for those of you that don't recall, 2010 was the pits economically. Like you could walk down the street and have your pick of foreclosed homes. Like the building that it was in, there was probably at least a half dozen, if not a dozen units that were all foreclosed, bank owned. And I was like, do I want this one? Do I want that one? Which one do I want to haggle with a bank for?
Yeah.
Which was actually
Nick and
kind of
I
fun.
actually bought our first townhouse in like late 2010, but it was from a developer, so it was brand new. And it just like they were having a hard time offloading them. So we got a good deal on like a 3 bedroom, 2 bath townhouse for like not very much money.
Yeah. I
Yep.
remember because I looked it up on the price history. This was like early days of Zillow or
Yeah.
whatever you could see and the condo was purchased, I think in 2007 for just over 300,000 and I bought it for 167,000.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think the
that's
bank had it
crazy.
listed for 190 and I'm like, how about 150? And they're like, we probably went back and forth 5 times and
Yeah.
I was kind of having fun with it.
I mean,
Haggling.
we bought ours that same year for like 179. This is us bragging about home prices a long time ago when interest rates were low and prices were both low. So maybe we should stop bragging about that because you just don't get that anymore.
No, no.
It's not everyone else's fault. It's just the market is different now. But yes, I think it's nice to be able to pinch pennies when you can and still get a nice property.
But to get that, we have to have an economic calamity where unemployment's
Yes.
10%
Yep.
and people don't have
Absolutely.
jobs and they can't afford their stuff. Interest rates are low because the economy sucks. So it's not all good old days. If you had a job and could afford the home, then great, a lot of opportunity. But for a lot of people, they couldn't. Um,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, had the roommate, eventually kicked out the roommate. Lindsay moved in, then we sold the condo and bought a house. Then we bought a bigger house. And now we buy organic produce and eggs from pasture raised chickens and haven't had instant
Pasteurized chicken.
pasture raised, not pasteurized.
I'm
It
so,
says pasture raised. So they like roam
no,
around
I
like
get
your
you. That makes a
chickens.
lot more sense. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, can you pasteurize a chicken? I don't know. Maybe. The milk is pasteurized. We haven't gone full natural milk just yet.
Got it.
But
Hmm. Oh my goodness.
yeah, we still drink pasteurized milk, but pasture raised chickens.
Hmm.
Um, haven't had instant top ramen in years, but we do make homemade ramen. which is quite tasty. So the half-baked harvest 25-minute chili oil ramen, if you're interested. It's
We
delicious.
have circled all the way back to Top Ramen because because I for a while there was buying Colette fancy ramen, and then she was like, "What about that one that comes in the plastic bag?"
The cup of
I
noodles.
what the no, like the plastic bag, not
Yeah, the
even the cup of
best. Get
noodles.
the
The
Costco pack
she
for like $7 for 50 of
yes.
them.
She was like, I that's the kind I like, Mom. Can I please have that? And I was like, I guess. I don't know. Please don't eat it every day. But yes, she's taken us back. She's got the taste buds of a college student, apparently. Anyway, okay. So circling back past our personal lives. So I think there's a lot of economic theory out there, which I find very interesting, probably because this is my background. But John Maynard Keynes wrote an article, Keynes, that's I can say that word, in 1930 titled Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. And I think that this is very interesting. But he theorized that by the year 2030, people would only need to work 15 hours a week. Because, and his idea was just, as technology improves, we become more efficient and more productive, which means we don't need to work as much to have the things that we need and want, right? Why was he so wrong? Obviously, no one feels like that. Instead of people working 15 hours a week, now it's like we have, if possible, two people working probably full time, maybe not full time, but, like there's nobody's working 15 hours a week, maybe a handful of people, but this is not a regular thing. There are lots of reasons that this didn't go how he thought it would. I think that I have a neighbor across the street. We've actually talked about this before, and he's like, it's capitalism. The capitalist machine just feeds us all of this nonsense with advertising, and we're basically forced into buying more and more stuff. And then we're stuck on this hamster wheel. And he thinks that it's like superimposed on us by this like demonic energy, basically. And I think to a certain extent, yes, we've kind of fallen into this trap where we buy the things that are advertised to us and like we think that we need things that maybe we only want and all and like we now a 700 or 800 square foot house feels totally inadequate and obviously we feel like we need much more space than that and all of those kinds of things. But I also think that people like working to a certain extent. So I think it goes both ways. So if you were working 15 hours a week, would that be fulfilling enough to you? And not everyone gets a ton of fulfillment out of their job. So I think that this varies from person to person and from family to family. But it's also like when we're thinking about the 1950s and have this very idealized sense of what that was like, there's a lot of feminist literature that says many women were not happy with just being in the home and not working very much or not working at all, and that they needed some sort of fulfillment that they weren't receiving. And maybe for some people, that's work, and maybe it's more than 15 hours a week. So there's lots of reasons that this probably happened. Probably people wanting to work to a certain extent and also enjoying the things that have come down the pipe in terms of cell phones and nicer vacations and all of those kinds of things. And maybe it's worth it to them to work. Who knows?
Yeah. I think if we stayed in those Levittown homes and sustained that lifestyle, then yeah, maybe 15 hours a week would suffice.
I mean, we'd have
But
no place to put all the other stuff that we buy.
yeah, you
Where are
wouldn't
we going to
have
put
the other
all the
stuff.
like whatever?
That's the point. Don't buy the stuff. And then you could live
This,
in an 800 square foot home with four
yeah,
kids and one bathroom.
all the sporting goods and chickens. That might just be me, and you know,
But like the theory makes sense, but we've
yeah.
found in reality from a technological efficiency standpoint, as technology and efficiency improves, and this is probably a lot to do with just our capitalistic nature
Hmm.
and competitive nature, rather than just taking that time off because, oh, we can get as much done in half the amount of time thanks to this cool technology. Now we can have more free time. We end up filling that free time with more ways to serve our customers or patients and hopefully stand out versus our competitors. Like with medicine and doctors, you guys have become more efficient over the years. You end up seeing more patients per day. What used to be an inpatient procedure is now an outpatient procedure. What used to be a house call is now a 12-minute in office visit or a virtual visit with a PA or NP to get a script filled for some bug you've come down with. So, it's allowed you guys to serve more people. Is that better? Uh, to be that's debatable from a mental health and wellness standpoint. Just patients are just a number in the system on the day of the week. I don't know if that's necessarily better than getting to know your patients on a personal level, but it's definitely made the system more efficient, allowed you guys to see more people, allowed the system to serve more people. Um, but let's not get sidetracked here on all the things with medicine that are good or bad.
Yeah, I
Um,
think one other example, just because I think this is really relevant for a lot of people right now, is that, we have all these AI note-taking systems and things that are starting to be introduced in medicine specifically. And I have one client who, like, her hospital system was like, we're going to introduce this and it's going to make your lives so much easier and it's going to be amazing. And then they were like, how many more patients do you think you can see per day because of this? Like, or per week or whatever. And I think they got enough pushback on it that it was like, hey, this is just allowing us to basically catch up. This is not going to allow us to see more patients. But I feel like eventually that's what's going to happen, you
oh
know?
yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
But
Yeah.
To Keynes's credit, there is some truth that we
Yeah.
do work less today than we did 100+ years ago when we
Hmm.
literally worked from sun up to sundown on farms. I know looking up some quick internet history after World War One, so early 1900s, 1920s, U.S. Steel reduced its work days from 12 hours a day to 8 hours per day in response to labor activists and unions, wanting shorter work days, the 40-hour work week. So, I mean, it used to be you
Hmm.
went to the steel mill and worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. You got Sundays off. Um, that was life. Now it's like leisure. We need some leisure time to fit in
Hmm.
there. So yeah, 15 hours a week by 2030 might be a stretch, although some Gen Zers are pretty close with some of their work habits. Not to pick on the younger generations, but anyways, moving on.
I think that's okay. I think it's one of those things where we see priorities shifting a little bit, when maybe we're getting closer, but again, much slower than maybe Keynes expected. Yeah. Yeah. If we'd lived that same simple lifestyle, most of us could maybe afford to live and only work 15 hours a week. Yeah. So I think it all comes down to like the reality of your situation minus the expectations that you have of what your life should be kind of leads to like your ultimate satisfaction. Is reality better than you expected? Is reality not quite as good? Are your expectations reasonable? Like, which part of this equation can we adjust to make sure that we're satisfied? And if we do end up kind of putting our expectations in context a little bit, that can help us adjust them if we need to in order to achieve that kind of satisfaction point of the equation. So, if we feel like we need a 2,800 square foot house, but in reality, maybe that's not what's necessary, and we would be a little bit happier and work a little bit less or something like that if we had a smaller house, then that can be something to consider. And that goes across the board. It's not easy necessarily to get out of a house and get into a different house, and maybe that's not a great example, but with lots of other things you can apply the same sort of logic.
I mean, the housing one's a legitimate one. Just right now, if you bought your house 5 years
Mm-hmm.
ago at a 3% interest
3%
rate,
interest.
it's might be
Mm-hmm.
more expensive to downsize on a
Yep.
monthly payment standpoint. And we did an episode on this back in October of 2021. Reality minus expectations equals satisfaction, trying to equate your level of satisfaction to a math formula, which is maybe a little too simplistic. Um, but go listen to that one if you want more on this. Just the point is, what reality is, like Rachelle said, compared to what you expect it to be, will determine, how happy or satisfied you are. So if your expectations are greater than what reality ends up being, you're probably going to end up disappointed. But if reality or exceeds your expectations, and you'll probably be happy. So, easy example: sports. You go to a sporting event to cheer your team on. If your team gets blown out, you're thinking, man, why did I waste money on those tickets? But if your team ends up winning in dramatic fashion, you're walking away feeling like that was one of the best games you ever went to. Or, for me personally, if you're watching on YouTube, I got my Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl champions hat on. That was awesome watching them just completely annihilate the Kansas City Chiefs in February. Like, couldn't have felt better that day. But if you're a Chiefs fan, you're probably feeling kind of crummy that day. Um, you can apply this across the board. Maybe you go out to dinner with no expectations. You just didn't want to cook. Let's find something quick and easy, but you end up eating one of the best meals you've ever had. You're pumped. But if you go to a nice steakhouse and expecting a great steak, but the steak is tough and chewy and overcooked, you're probably disappointed. That you spent money, or hopefully you can get a credit to go back again or something. But on the financial front, which is what this podcast is about, financial planning, uh, I think the thing you can control most is your expectations. Easier said than done. We want to keep up with the Joneses. We got to get the newest iPhone with the Siri and the AI and the Google Maps built in so that you don't have to download a printout of MapQuest or carry a map with you. But if you expect a lot but don't get all of it, you may not be completely satisfied. But if you expect very little and end up with a lot, you're probably pleased. So, retirement is a good example. What do you want your retirement to look like? Is it just being able to afford life, garden in the backyard, go to the farmer's market, ride your bike, just enjoy some leisure time? Or, are we thinking, I want to travel the world on my private yacht? So, two totally different expectations, neither right nor wrong. One's not better or worse than the other, but one requires a higher level of financial means than the other. And it's going to be easier to obtain the less expensive one. So, I'm not saying we need to have zero expectations or keep our expectations low, but try and keep them within reason of your circumstances with your income and your savings rate. So that savings rate, we've done an episode on this one too, is probably the most important thing you can focus on financially, making sure you're saving an adequate amount over the long run to achieve your financial objectives. And the good general rule of thumb is save at least 20% of your gross income each year. And as your income rises over time, if you keep that 20% in line, it's going to mean your savings level on a monetary value or nominal value increases over time as well. So if you make 100,000 a
Mhm.
year, 20% of 100K is 20,000 a year. If you increase your income to $1 million a year, 20% of a million is $200,000 a year. And if you keep that up over your career, it should allow you to maintain your standard of living throughout your golden years, assuming you retire at a reasonable age and all that. But yeah, I think focus on what you can control. Try not to get too lofty of expectations, and life should be good.
Yep. And it may allow you a little more time. Maybe you get to work less. Maybe it's not 15 hours a week, but maybe you get to work less, which could be very nice.
One day, maybe you can work 15
Yeah.
hours a week.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Like I think there's a lot of, physicians, especially who are closer to retirement, who just work a little bit because, they want to keep their skills sharp and get out of the house a bit.
Yeah, you work
Yeah.
2 days a week and life's good.
Yep.
So,
Awesome. Well, thank you for listening, everyone.
see you next time.